So, and then he said, get this, ready? Why the long face?
Ah!
Get it because he's a horse.
Ah! Welcome to Get Recc'd.
Oh, what a pleasant joke we just had.
We have
Welcome everyone. Welcome back to Get Recc'd. This is episode 2. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Falgu.
And I am your other host for this evening, specifically this evening, Louis Falgu.
Yeah, you are, and this goes to the last episode as well. You are a temporary host. I'm looking for a new brother. So if anyone out there,
anybody in the chat,
hit
us up in the chat if you want to be Steven's new brother.
Yeah, chat hashtag new Falgu brother if you want to be my new brother.
Yeah, because so he's out there, he's hiring. He's got those billboards out in the street. 3 billboards outside Phoenix, Arizona.
Resumes lately, and there's some top picks right now.
Yeah. I haven't been a very good brother. I've been very I didn't quite enjoy Trolls, and so he was very upset about that, actually.
Right, that is the number one. That's actually in the job description for brother.
Do you like Trolls? Yes, no.
Right. How do you feel about the Trolls series of films being the one that they have that came out last year?
Right. Meme Thief, get out right now. I can't escape it. All right, anyway. This is our first time streaming this too, so hopefully it goes well. Anybody who gets into the chat, please tell us if the mix is good, because apparently last time the mix was not good, and that was a problem. But I think we're ready to start, right?
Yeah, I think we can get this ball rolling.
So, why don't you real quick tell everyone what you recommended to me? You don't need to explain it again, but what was it?
Yes. So I recommended to you HAIM's Something to Tell You, which was their album that came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a quick background again, HAIM is a band consisting of 3 sisters. Again, this is kind of why I'm looking for a new brother. Right now we only have the 2. I think 3 would really round us out.
Yes.
But 3 sisters, and like I mentioned, came out this year.
Mm-hmm. So we've got it up here, and he recommended this to me. I hope everyone's familiar with the concept of this show now. We don't need to explain it. I have to say, I will give my brief thoughts, and then we can discuss if that's okay with you. And I won't be... I guess we should just start discussing. Who cares? All right, yes. So, this album, I didn't much care for it. Boom! Mic drop!
Okay, so as I mentioned, anyone in the chat right now, I see there's only one person in the chat, but guess what? You're my new brother. No,
hey,
one person in the chat just said it was not good. You are no longer in the running. That's a quick disqualification.
Thank you, Meme Thief. Yes, so, not awful, just not good. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts too. I'm actually... much like Trolls, I feel very much the same way about this album.
And that's what I'm shooting for. With all of my recommendations, I want to have the most middling experience for you as possible.
Oh man, this is going to be a fun ride, isn't it? Yeah, so... what I understand, I recognize their first album's cover art. I feel like I'd seen it around before. I feel like it got some hype, actually. I remembered hearing about it. And, you told me they were pop rock. I think I recognized that last album as being a pop rock album. I never listened to it. Yeah, this album is so sterile. Let's see. So, I don't even know where to begin with it. I kind of just feel like the entire album, pretty much, like, there are tracks that I would say are fairly bad. There's one track I think is pretty good. One. Yeah, it's like the whole thing for me was kind of a numbing experience. Listening to... let me give some background. When it comes to pop music, what tends to impress me, and of course this isn't always true, But what tends to impress me in pop music like this, I'm not talking art pop or anything like that. I'm talking just your basic ass, like, let's be catchy, you know, let's write some hooks, you know. What tends to impress me is I like great arrangements. If the pop song sounds particularly huge and well arranged and maybe very lively and busy, I tend to appreciate that. I like really large sounds in pop music, things that sound very huge. A lot of pop music sounds very sort of contained to my ears, especially with the way that they tend to be produced, especially the vocals, which are usually produced very dry. This album, they're a little more wet, reverb-wise, but still generally very dry. And this album doesn't really hit on either of those qualifiers. Then the other thing is it so well written that it's undeniably hooky and fun? And this album also does not meet that characteristic. And then there's another characteristic for other kinds of things, which this album seems to be going for a little bit more, is does it have some kind of emotional depth? This album certainly strives for that, but I wouldn't really say it accomplishes it for the most part. So, yeah, I'm left completely in the middle.
Maybe, so I would say the one thing that, without having any background going into this one, I feel like I appreciate this album because, and I guess I should say, so I do enjoy this album, I guess, just to get that out of the way. I appreciate this album because these three sisters are incredibly talented. And I don't know if this album necessarily showcases that always. I have been following them for quite a while now. For instance, I think last time I mentioned that, you know, there are three sisters. They are the oldest, middlest, and youngest. They have no other siblings. I think I mentioned their names, then I said that. So just to clear up any confusion, Elena is the oldest. Danielle is the oldest, Esty is the middle sister, and Elena is the youngest sister. So Danielle actually sang and performed backup to the Strokes lead vocalist when he did his solo run when the Strokes broke up for a little while. Mm-hmm. So I've been following them for quite a while. They also, I think they have some performances in like the Live Lounge, and I don't know if you're familiar with like BBC Radio 1, that stuff where they do the covers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they have some performances on there that I think are a really great showcase of the talent that these three girls have. And as I mentioned, I don't know if I think that this album showcases it necessarily, but I do think that there are a lot of tracks on this album that I enjoy. So I don't know, maybe do you want to talk through some specific tracks?
Yeah, sure. The one that I actually like, I'll start there positively, is Found It in Silence. This song reminded me of Kate Bush. It's not nearly as good as Kate Bush, but it was clearly going for a sort of Kate Bush, Hounds of Love vibe with the sort of pulsating string section. I do feel like the track, it's only 4 minutes, but it overstays its welcome because it doesn't take itself anywhere, and there's no build instrumentally. It's pretty samey the whole way through, but I did like the way it sounded quite a bit. And I think the strings sounded pretty good in the production here too. I liked how crisp they sounded, so I liked that song. And then I guess, something I want to mention on Something to Tell You on Right Now. Right Now is like, I think that track is the biggest disappointment I had while listening to this, because about a little ways into the track, so it's got this really cheap sounding drum beat, and for a second I was like, okay, this is the one where they didn't try. But then it starts to build, and I'm like, okay, this is going somewhere. And then there's this one point that is fucking awesome, but it's so early in the song. Is this just like this enormous, distorted, loud, blaring guitar chord comes in, and then and I'm like, oh my god, are we like about to like? Is this about to like be a surprise? Like, was I not expecting this? And then it just stops, and then the track just continues on the same bland path it was going on for the first minute. Until at the very end, the drums sort of pick up, but they have like gated reverb and the whole thing sounds flat. I don't think this is. I think this track's pretty middling, but I just wanted to mention it because I thought this one was really going somewhere in a way that I was really gonna like, but it didn't. Nothing else here got my hopes up quite like that. I don't deny the album's hooky. There's let's see, like the track Little of Your Love I found to be so top 40. It was kind of annoying, but it did have a very I'll give it credit for being very hooky for sure. All the tracks, well, most of the tracks are pretty hooky. I just don't think the hooks are that great. Nothing got stuck in my head really. I don't know. It's difficult for me to call it individual tracks because a lot of the album blended together for me, so I don't know. If you want to call some out, I might be able to say things about them, but...
Yeah, well, I think one of the most interesting things is that, so the 3 singles that came out of this album, Want You Back, Little of Your Love, and then Nothing's Wrong, which is, so that's tracks 1, 2, and 3, and that's so strange to me. So the tracks that I think, so I agree, I Found It in Silence, Kept Me Crying, Little of Your Love, Ready for You are probably my favorite tracks off of this one. And I don't remember. So the other thing I'll mention is like what's, to your point of, large scale productions. I think what's strange is that this album, one thing that I think is a knock on this album is like there are a lot of instruments being performed, but I don't know if you ever really feel that when you're listening to this. Like, so for instance, I'm looking at the personnel and what they're performing, and there's like dulcimer, marimba.
I don't even remember when that showed up.
The bottle, like a bottle.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And yeah, but I do think there are some things that are interesting. Like, I think at one point there's like they use a horse neighing. And they also use like a fax machine, I think, to open Found It in Silence. That like initial distorted Found It in Silence is a fax machine. So there's some stuff there that I think is pretty smart. The other thing that I'll mention going into this album is, so you didn't listen to their last album, but you might have been able to pick up on it. So they, I think, have a very kind of late 70s, early 80s vibe.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
In some of the songs, it's like very equivalent to Fleetwood Mac style and Eagle style, especially in their last album.
I'll give them Eagles.
I don't know if you would, yeah. So the like Stevie Nicks style, I don't know if shows up this as much in this one, but definitely in the last one, there are some tracks that are very in that same vein.
Yeah, I saw they referenced Fleetwood Mac as an influence. I definitely didn't hear it here, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I will say, you mentioned Kept Me Crying. That might have actually, in my opinion, be the worst track. Because that song, the way the bass is mixed, it provides no foundation for that instrumental. I felt like that whole thing felt so hollow. That entire song felt so hollow. And it's not like there isn't a bass line, because there is, but that's basically all there is, and it's mixed sort of quietly, and the whole thing gave me a weird vibe. I want to shout out the final track here, because it almost worked. What's it called? Oh, Night So Long, yeah. This track almost worked, but it's another track that should have built. And then when it did finally pay off, the musical payoff was so bland that it was like the worst part of the track at the ending. I just didn't care for it. If they so that you could either go for like a sort of does a lot with very little kind of closer, or you can try to build up and give me a huge finish. They didn't really do either. So I didn't find this track almost got to me, but it didn't. I don't know. I don't have a ton to say. I feel like I feel like one of my main issues is one of the things that consistently leaves this album feeling so sterile to me is just the drum production, the drum mixing. It's so boring to me. And the vocal style is very, very, very. I don't know. They're good singers, but the vocal arrangements don't convey any of the emotions that some of the tracks want to. Maybe Little of Your Love has a sort of happy vibe, I guess. But it's again leaves the album feeling kind of distant for me, where I'm not really getting the sort of things it's trying to convey to me. Yeah, but I like Founded in Silence, so I don't know. What do you?
I'll just...
Well, I want to know, like, what do you see in this? Because I mean, you haven't really, you said you liked it, but like, what do you think is really special about this besides the fact that they have talent?
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest thing is that I feel like this is in this movement of pop that I think is it's so pop is kind of diverging right now. I feel like you have pop that follows the most recent trend, and it is the most absolute sterile stuff on the radio right now. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but if you listen to a top 40 station right now, every single song sounds the same, and it is like no tonal variation in vocals. Just like, I don't even understand how this has become so popular. So you have a group like HAIM. I would throw like the most recent Carly Rae in there. And you know, the list is getting smaller and smaller of pop groups that are actually trying something. And so I think that and this goes to their last album and goes to this album too, they have a sound that they're going for. It might not always hit. I think that this album, for me, I feel like it hits all the way through. And I really enjoy that sound and that feel that their tracks have. I don't think that these tracks are the deepest tracks when it comes to lyrics. I mean, even looking at the names of the tracks on these, I think you can pretty much tell that, you know, there wasn't too much thought put in on that side. But from the actual sound that these three have, that they've had as I followed them throughout their entire career now for only a couple albums, but as I mentioned in other locations as well, I really enjoy that aspect of this one. I feel like this album gets into a groove as you're listening to it, and that groove suspends throughout the entire track list.
Yeah, I'll say it definitely sticks to a fairly consistent vibe, which is probably why I found myself not caring for it all the way through. Is because I didn't care for what it was going for. I feel like you mentioned Carly Rae, but I think her album was so much more lively than this, and I didn't even love that either. But it was. I definitely would say it was better than this. I guess the thing is, if a lot of these pop artists are going to be drawing from the 80s for their key inspiration, that's immediately going to turn me off, because I contend that, minus maybe this decade, or though Miss Pippin may even be better, the 80s was probably the worst decade for music overall in terms of delivering the least amount of classics. I feel like the 80s was, since the 60s at least, 60s to now, the 80s was probably the weakest. Although this decade's trying really hard. So if that's where they're going to draw their inspiration, then I don't think it's going to appeal to me unless they can make it really, really good and well written, which Carly Rae did on a good few of the tracks on her album. But I don't know. I see what you're saying, though. I definitely do think HAIM or HAIM or whatever is in the same category. They're definitely doing similar things.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make. It's like, if you enjoy what they're going for, I think that you will very much enjoy this album. If you don't get yourself into the groove that they're setting as you go forward in these track lists, and I would say the same for their last one as well, although I don't think that the two albums go for the same. This one I feel like, I don't know how I would put, a little more modern is maybe what I would say. Whereas the last one was very much like, we are trying to emulate like late 70s, early 80s, that sound. Whereas this one, I feel like they start to kind of develop a little bit of their own voice. But if you don't enjoy that, then I think that this album will not hit for you.
Yeah, I definitely want to check out their first album. I understand that it was a bit of a cult hit, and I definitely want to check it out. Because like I said, I don't think this album is bad. I think there are a few tracks that are a little bad, but there's nothing terrible. I mean, yeah. I'll say my final statement on this, and as I'm feeling definitely a straight up 5 on this one again, just like Trolls. Steven, you're hitting it out of the ballpark with keep giving me.
Yeah, how many more fives can I give you?
I want to just consistent five. And then I'd say, would I recommend this? No. Not honestly, like I don't even know if I'd recommend it to anybody. I'm sure there are people who will dig it, but I feel like if you want to get something like this, there's better. Like I would definitely sooner recommend Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion than I would recommend this. So I would say no on that. But
And then my final thoughts are just the one thing I'll mention is speaking of their last album. So I don't think if for those who might have listened to their last album, I think If I Could Change Your Mind was their best song off the last one. I don't know if any of the songs on this album hit that mark, but I would say that I feel like this album from start to finish is more consistent and is easier to listen to than the last one. The last one had some low notes, I thought. So with that being said, would I recommend it? Well, I already did. So yes.
yeah.
I recommend it too specifically. I think that definitely if you like the 80s vibe, I think that you'll definitely dig this.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose I'd say a similar thing.
Because the total runtime really isn't that long, so.
Yeah, it's very manageable. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not an hour and whatever that the Beefheart album was.
Yeah, it's true.
That's my benchmark.
we got so let's turn to the chat where Meme Thief's been saying some things and we'll read them out and then
Sure.
Meme Thief says he said it's not awful, it's just not good. When I said it was pop rock, he put emphasis on pop and then rock in all lowercase. He says it's so clean that it's annoying. Steven, when you said they had talent, he said the members of Linkin Park had a lot of talent. Would you contend that they are good? And then he said, to be honest, some of the tracks kind of feel like the ultra inspirational top 40 vibe. And on that point, I'll say I don't know that I see that, to be honest. Maybe a Little of Your Love. Little of Your Love had like the horn section that Shake It Off had. That's what it reminded me of, by the way. Little of Your Love, not quite as bad, but the horn section was like that sounded very Shake It Off to me. Which is not a high benchmark in my mind, although in some people's it is. But I think it's time to move on. I will give brief. So last episode I recommended that Steven watch the first 8 episodes of BoJack Horseman. He actually ended up watching the whole first season. And so we'll move into that. Steven, why don't you give us your brief thoughts on season 1 of BoJack Horseman?
Season 1 of BoJack Horseman. So I would say just my going in is that I enjoyed it quite a lot. And so with that, I'll just move straight into the discussion. So I would say the one thing about, so I had not seen this show before. So this is actually my first viewing of this first season. This show is unapologetically insufferable and depressing. Like it is a depressing. I put extreme emphasis on because it hits some very. The one example that I put was so the one thing I'll mention is that we might get into a little bit of spoiler-ish territory.
Oh yeah, we absolutely are going to get into spoiler territory.
And I think that's probably just a general thing that we need to talk about as we get into show. When we're talking about shows, movies, that sort of things, we're going to be calling out specific scenes. So So just as a heads up. Mm-hmm. So the example that I have on how depressing that this show gets, there's an episode. So the basic premise is that there's a character, BoJack Horseman. He was in a show in the 90s, as the outro song reminds you.
Back in the 90s, he was in a very famous TV show.
Yeah, back in the 90s, he was in a very famous TV show. It was called Horsin' Around. Uh-huh. And he was a horse that basically adopted 3 children. Is that right?
Uh-huh. It's like a Full House-esque sort of sitcom. Yeah.
So the youngest child, her name is Sarah Lynn. And so she is like a child actress. There's an episode, she appears, I think, 2 times in the season, but there's a specific episode where you kind of watch her progression. So she goes from child actress to like pop star, She has a big downhill spiral.
Yeah.
And then in the episode, BoJack kind of takes her in.
Mm-hmm.
So the episode is kind of like, the idea of the episode is that, you know, he's trying to be more of a father figure, having some sort of child he never had. He feels like he messed up with Sarah Lynn. And Sarah Lynn is this, like, on this spiraling crash course. She needs to go to rehab. So the episode ends where they try to get her to go to rehab. BoJack has like this big, like, okay, I'm gonna step in, because she's like running all over him. I'm gonna step in. I'm gonna get her to go to rehab. And she says, "No, I don't think I need to." And she just walks out, and the episode ends.
Yep.
And it's that kind of stuff in this show where it's like this depressing stuff that has no happy ending. It just stays that way, and the show does not care.
Yeah, no, you get no happy endings. That, you know, yeah. So I feel like season 1 is easily the weakest season, and that's mainly because I think it doesn't really take off until the second half. I think the episodes are mostly good. The first episode is not good, which is a shame, but I feel like that's just how modern animations are. You got to be like, okay, well, just trudge through the beginning and then it gets good. That's how it always is. So fine. Yeah, I feel like episode 1 is not good. I feel like it picks up immediately after, but I think the show really takes off from episode 8, the telescope, and onwards. I would also say, to your point about the show being depressing, I don't actually, for me at least, it didn't connect that way until episode 8. You know, the Sarah Lynn thing is played all for laughs. But it does begin to show its underside pretty quickly, where you do start to realize that, like, in your average adult cartoon, what would just be a funny little joke seems to be happening consistently and getting more and more depressing every time it does. Every time something bad happens, it seems worse and worse, and everything stays that way too. Anytime anything affects the environment, it stays that way. For the rest of the show, like how Hollywood becomes Hollywood because they stole the D in the Hollywood sign.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that actually, because that's interesting to me, because there is this thing going on within the show. We kind of actually referenced it to intro this episode, but there's this running gag where BoJack has to explain his jokes. Like, he just does not pick up on cues as to whether people think things are funny or not. So every time he has a joke in his stand-up or like in his TV show or whatever, he like goes through and like makes sure everyone gets it. Mm-hmm. And he does that in like letters that he writes and stuff too through the show. Yeah, I think that's an interesting parallel, because in a way that's very similar to the way that this show, one, will have a gag and then follow all the way through on it. Yeah, like with the Hollywood thing. I'll come back to that too. But also, for instance, I have an example. In one episode, they leave Todd in the front yard of someone's house. Mm-hmm. And in most shows, it would be like, oh, they drive away, it's funny, and then he just shows back up, right? Uh-huh. In this show, they explicitly say, oh, I forgot Todd. Turn around and go pick up Todd. Yep. So in a way, it's like there's this meta thing going on where it's like BoJack has to explain his jokes, and the show is also in a way explaining their own jokes, which I think is brilliant. It's hilarious.
Well, what I think is, yeah, and to go back on the point that things stay the same way, you know, how it's never a one-off gag. I feel like there's also something deeply symbolic about that your actions have consequences, which is the entire message of the show, and it plays out that way in everything they do. Right. It's and
it's the smallest things too. Like in the Sarah Lynn episode that I mentioned, she like burns their ottoman or their or whatever,
the ottoman,
and that thing stays that way for the whole rest of the show.
Yep.
It's like all messed up and broken up and stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that's hilarious.
But yeah, I think let's start on the lighter side of things. So, how do you think that this show is an effective comedy?
Yeah, I do think so, and I can give you some examples of some of the gags that I actually really enjoyed, as a comedy standpoint. So, the Andrew Garfield running joke is just hilarious to me. Yes, and there's like in that Sarah Lynn episode, I'm gonna kind of give away the the
It's
joke.
it's fine.
But
We're spoiling everything. Who cares?
yeah, so in the Sarah Lynn episode, Sarah Lynn and Andrew Garfield were dating and they break up. And so there's a point where her and BoJack's roommate Todd, she's like talking about how she doesn't want BoJack to bring stuff up because it reminds her of Andrew Garfield, and it's stuff like he loves lasagna, he hates Mondays.
Yeah.
And that's hilarious to me. There's some other ones that I liked a lot too, like the "Are you a Zelda or a Zoe?"
Mm-hmm.
That runs through the whole show as well. Basically, BoJack has a counterpart in this guy named Mr. Peanut Butter, who pretty much stole the premise of BoJack's show. It was like he's a dog and he adopted two girls, and one of them was one of them's a Zelda and Zoe, and one of them's like an extreme introvert, and one of them's an extreme extrovert.
Yeah.
And this an "Are you Zoe" or an "Are you a Zelda" thing pops up intermittently throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that I liked a lot, you mentioned the Hollywood sign. So that Hollywood thing is really good, really smart. And on that episode too, there's like Beyonce is walking through the street, and she like BoJack steals the D from the Hollywood sign, and then to make a scene, he's throwing money off a building, and Beyonce slips on it.
Yep.
And then she can never perform again.
Breaks her ankle. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's stealing the D on the Hollywood sign. D for Diane, who he's trying to impress. His ghostwriter, which is what she is in this season. She's his ghostwriter, writing his autobiography.
Right. And then there's a news in the same episode. There's a news thing, and it's like Mr. Peanut Butter gives Diane the D.
Yep. Yeah. The newscasts in the show are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other newscast one is Neil McFeel, the Navy SEAL.
Yep, Neil McBeal, the Navy SEAL. Yep. Did you steal a meal from Neil McBeal, the Navy SEAL? Yeah. Yeah, they do a lot of good wordplay. It's fun.
So yes, I think the wordplay, I think a lot of the gags are really funny. So I think it does work as a comedy. But to your point of, this show picks up in this like second half, it gets to the point where there are episodes that are clearly not comedic. So the one that I specifically called out, although there are a couple good, funny gags in the episode.
Yeah.
There's this running gag with Doctor Who.
Yes.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But episode 11 is this complete insanity. It's basically what happens is Diane presents the book that she's written, and BoJack does not like it because one thing about him is he is completely narcissistic and stubborn, and that comes across on every episode. He doesn't like it, so he says, "I'm going to write it." And so him, Sarah, and Todd try to write it, but they do it on drugs, and it is this nonsense acid trip thing.
Yeah,
that gets super dark.
I feel like episode 11, out of all the moments, because I will say, I'm not going to do a thing where I'm going to wreck you another season. You should just finish the show on your own terms. But what I will say is, like, every throughout the show, there are these episodes that hit so monumentally hard that they're hard to watch. Right? They're not sad, they're depressing. Like, there's a difference. You feel bad. You feel like you want to lay down and stare at the ceiling for a while after watching some of these episodes. I think there may have only been one or two times the show like actually hit harder than Downer Ending in season 1, episode 11. Because I feel like the scene where he I guess we're talking about the lows now. The scene where he meets Diane at the ghostwriter convention and just spills his thoughts on the microphone is
and
painful.
Because he asks her multiple times. He asks her, like, "Do you think I'm a good person?"
Yeah.
Multiple times, and there's no response, and then this episode ends.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's this dark, and this again is predicated by this crazy acid trip for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, but and then before that moment too, you get the scene that probably hurts the most, where at the end of the acid trip, he imagines himself. Oh, hi Paris. Thank you. I appreciate that you like our show idea. Yes, at the end of right before he gets out of this acid trip, he dreams that he is with this deer who was brought up in like who he knew for a brief period of time in the 80s, which was like in a flashback in episode 8, and he imagines himself with her having a child, and like it's such a realistic depiction. The dialogue is like, it's like you just stepped into a day in the life with this couple. There's nothing really explicitly like this is a dream sequence about the segment. And then I think what does Charlotte say? She says like just like, think about how good this could have been if this is the life you'd chosen. And then he wakes up drunk in the parking lot. And it's just like, oh God, it's so rough.
So Paris in the chat brings up a good point. He mentions that this show would not feel out of place on Adult Swim. I completely agree. This is 100% Adult Swim territory, because Adult Swim has this like these super surreal, almost nonsense shows, and I don't think BoJack gets to that level.
No.
You know, there is a consistent thread throughout every episode, and you are throughout the season getting to an endpoint, but there are some episodes that are just so depressing and surreal. It is, especially that episode that we just talked about, it is like, you can tell why this is something that cable stations did not pick up.
Yeah, and I mean so I recommended you up to episode 8.
Yep.
Let's talk about episode 8, because I think that even if you hadn't finished the season, going to episode 8 would give you a decent view, because I think episode 8 is devastating, and it's probably the first time when I think it like really sets in what the message of this show is. So this is the episode with Herb, if you remember.
Okay. Yep. So one thing to mention before we talk about that then is, so one of the consistent plot lines from this season is that basically BoJack falls in love with Diane.
Yeah, his ghostwriter. Yeah.
And so that's why some of the things like we mentioned, he steals the Hollywood D for her and everything. So episode 9, he goes to meet Herb, who was his show producer, right?
Yeah.
Producer? Mm-hmm. Yeah, show producer of Horse and Around.
I think he was the director, actually. He was the he was the co-creator of it, though.
Yeah, basically the co-creator. And he's on he's dying. He's terminal. And you come to find out in the episode that in a way, BoJack, I wouldn't say necessarily completely backstabbed him, but BoJack did not help him, because what happened was Herb was like fired
because he was gay. Yeah, and they were firing him.
Gay,
it was the 80s,
and BoJack did not walk away from the show.
Yeah.
With his friend.
Yeah. At
the time. So then cut to the present, and BoJack and Todd and Diane are going to talk to Herb, who they've been estranged forever. And again, to the point of this show never comes to a happy ending. They do not reconnect.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it ends with them kind of getting in this tussle, this fight, and just separating and leaving. And Herb specifically says, "You backstabbed me. Like, I will never forgive you." Because BoJack is not one to say sorry either, so he does that, and you assume at some point these two are going to probably reconnect. No, they don't. And then it only gets worse from there, because on the drive home, BoJack then goes in to kiss Diane, and it becomes extremely awkward.
Yeah.
Todd is knocked out in the lawn, like I mentioned. They go back to get him.
That's in the next episode. Yeah, Casey's right. It was the 90s when Herb got fired. That's right. But anyway, yeah. So because BoJack and Herb seem to hit it off. That's the thing. Is like the episode starts picking up. It's a little awkward at first. You can tell that Herb's still not happy about what happened. He's making jabs about it. But he's still like, it seems like they're kind of hitting it off, and they're doing well. And then BoJack leaves, and he's like, I got to go back in and apologize to him, you know. But when he goes in to apologize to him, Herb doesn't forgive him. And it's just like, it becomes clear that BoJack's only there to get that closure, and Herb specifically says he's not going to give him that closure. It's just one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've ever watched ever. like not like outside of the show even. And yeah, and then the show gives you a nice double punch where then after this happened, he goes in to kiss Diane, and it just lingers on this shot of her like shocked and walking back to the car, and then the credits roll.
Yeah, and this is not the first time it happens in the season. It's not the last time it happens in this season, and I'm sure it's not the last time it happens in this show. Like, I think probably the first. So the Sarah Lynn one might have been the first one where I really felt like, wow, that is like, you would have assumed there would have been some happy resolution to this, but no. So that was like episode 2, I want to say.
3.
Or yeah, episode 2 or 3. And then there's also the episode where it ends, where they do. So you have this little bit of, oh, maybe it'll happen, where like he writes this letter to Diane that's very heartfelt. It comes from her like fake pen pal kind of a thing. It's like a part of one of the episodes. Mm-hmm. Then on the next episode, I think, is when he steals the Hollywood sign, and he at the end of the episode calls her, spills his guts over the phone on voicemail, and at the same time she is being proposed to by Mr. Peanut Butter.
Yeah.
She says yes. And then she calls him back without having even listened to the voicemail.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends with him basically saying, hey, don't worry about that. I was drunk again or whatever. And that's the end of the episode.
Yep.
And this happens so often in this show that it's very unique in that way. I can't think of another. I mean, even dramas. Like, I can't even think of anything that is such a potentially like realistic depiction of what someone in this portion of their life, who really is just a total asshole, like all the time, would be like. I think maybe I can think of maybe like Curb Your Enthusiasm can sometimes get to this, but besides that, like it can be very dark and very deep.
Yeah, because I think the show's very much a comedy drama. You know, I mean, it is a comedy, but it's also a drama at the same time. It's or a dramedy or whatever you want to call it. But I do feel like it is probably one of the heaviest things out there, which is so strange because it is, in a lot of ways, I think humor-wise, it's probably above the fray for your average adult cartoon, but I wouldn't say this show is hilarious.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It had some laugh out loud moments for me, but is not consistently a funny show necessarily.
I wouldn't say like the jokes don't land. I think almost all of them do. I just don't think the show is like hilarious. But I feel like it's really a great deconstruction of adult cartoons, because adult cartoons are like just for the most part, on average, like one of the worst things to ever exist. Like, most adult cartoons are complete trash. There aren't very many good ones. And it takes that idea, because all these adult cartoons always have these like family men or whatever, and they're always like assholes, but like they never really get their just desserts. There's nothing realistic about it. It's all played for laughs. Haha, isn't it funny that they're a piece of shit to everyone they love? You know, and this show takes that to its logical conclusion and says, okay, well, let's put that person in the real world and see how that, and see what actually happens. You know, it's not just this hilarious misadventures of a complete asshole who is unlikable in every way. It's actually devastating and horrible and terribly depressing, and is a completely unfulfilling life.
And I think the other thing that's interesting about it is it's very nuanced in that way, because you have characters like Diane who kind of see a different side of BoJack, and very much intentionally. They don't end up together, at least not in this season. But then you also have a character. So that's one aspect of how this could play out. Then you have a character who he is absolutely consistently shitty to, and that's Princess Carolyn. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that even though he treats her horribly, there's still this on again, off again thing between them, to the point where there's this one episode specifically centered around Princess Carolyn, or for the most part.
Yeah.
Where,
say anything?
Yeah, I think that one. And basically, like, she is on again, off again his girlfriend, and then also at the same time, his agent.
Yeah.
And
It's actually
so
pretty
there's-
funny, I guess.
Which is pretty funny, yeah. And there's this episode where like two studios merge and someone else becomes his agent, and for whatever reason, she works so hard for him
Yeah.
over and over again throughout this show. And they even specifically mention it to no benefit to her.
Yeah.
Other than I think that there is some very nuanced relationship that the two of them share that is not explicit, but you can tell just by the nature of the actions of the characters is always there throughout the season.
Yeah, Casey brings up a good point. He says, like, don't forget Todd is also a character BoJack is consistently shitty to. In fact, even more than Princess Carolyn, which is definitely true. If you remember
and that is very depressing because Todd is extremely naive of a character.
Yeah.
And there's an episode, and I was going to bring up actually one of the things that I really enjoyed this season was the Margot Martindale thing where she shows up a couple times for whatever reason.
Character actress Margot Martindale.
Yeah, character actress Margot Martindale. There's an episode where he pays Margot Martindale and has this whole setup where Todd's going to have this rock opera and he's finally going to get his big break, going to move out. BoJack does not want him to move out and sets up this sabotage.
Yeah.
This complete sabotage. And Todd then eventually figures it out.
Yeah.
And even though BoJack is consistently shitty to this guy, and he finds out that there's sabotage, there's still this naivete about him where there are certain actions in one of the episodes where it very much seems like Todd is trying to get revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case at all. Todd is still, for whatever reason, friends with this guy throughout the entire season.
Yeah. Or at least attempting to be.
Yeah, and it's depressing, not from from Todd's ankle. It's like this guy is so nice and so giving, and gets walked all over by BoJack.
Yeah.
Even to the point where he gets completely sabotaged.
Yeah.
And it does not necessarily change his overall perspective. There is some conflict in the season about this sabotage thing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like they still stay roommates, friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say one thing about the show too is we've been talking about it a lot, but the characters are like just absolutely great. I think every single one of them has so many. I honestly feel like you could take you could probably make an entertaining hour-long analysis of any of these characters. I mean, except maybe Todd, I guess, but they're so deeply nuanced. They have, I mean, their flaws and their likable traits are really well balanced. Even in the case of BoJack, who is essentially likable only from like a pity angle. Like there's really nothing good about him. Although somehow they manage to make you care and like him, even though you shouldn't.
You still root for him for some reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that reason is, honestly, because he is just very shitty.
Yeah. But I agree with Meme Thief.
I think even to the point where even in his glory days, because they flash back to him during the Horse and Around show, and he's like outwardly he seems like a really great guy during that period where he should be the happiest in his life. Uh-huh. But then they'll like show these parts of the flashback, the kind of behind the scenes, and he is still just a total ass.
Yeah.
To everyone.
Well, they do contextualize it by showing brief glimpses of his childhood, which they get into more later in the show. But so you understand. I think that's another thing is the show gives you a great context and understanding for why he is the way he is. It doesn't like excuse it, but it makes you understand. So
yeah, one of the most interesting things to me is this season is about Diane writing his memoir. Mm-hmm. And as the season progresses, you as the viewer could theoretically write his memoir.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most interesting things that I have to believe wasn't intentionally part of this show. So
yeah, I do just think all around, I will say I do think season 1's the weakest just because it has a bit of a rocky start in my opinion and in most people's opinion generally. But I will say, and when it first came out, they previewed 7 episodes for critics, and so the show got pretty negative reception all around. That's why you see it has like a negative score on Rotten Tomatoes, I think, for the first season. They didn't see anything after the first 7 episodes, which I'll say I enjoy those episodes, but without the context of the end of the season, I do think they come across as a little more average adult fare. I think there are glimpses of what it's really going for, but I don't think you really get it until episodes like 8 and 11. But yeah, no, it's super brutal. I mean, I think that like the thing is, and one of the things I love about the show because it's up there among my favorite shows. For a period, I would have said it was my favorite show. I don't know if I'd say that at this point, but it kind of goes around. But I do feel like this show is, as much as I think it's brilliant, I think it only gets more brilliant as it goes along. I think it's pretty funny, but that's usually not what I first associate with it. And I think it's very biting too. It's a sort of celebrity satire in a new lens, because that sort of thing gets really boring and it's been overdone. But I feel like the show takes it in a new direction. But at the same time, it's also terribly hard to watch, and there are moments where you just feel so bad because it's like you know he's an asshole, you know he's a piece of shit, but you still want to see the best for BoJack, but you just never ever do, like every single time.
Yeah. So the final 2 thoughts that I have, and then I'll say whether I would recommend this to people or not. So we talked a little bit about how every character is great. I will also mention that all the vocal talent in this show is amazing.
Oh yeah.
BoJack, voiced by Will Arnett, is so wonderful. It's really great. Princess Carolyn as well.
Amy Sedaris, I believe.
Yep. And I really like Peanut Butter.
Yeah, I don't remember who voices him, but yeah.
Yeah, but just wanted to get that out there as well. And then the final thing I'll mention is, so speaking of the characters, I think probably my favorite character from the show that isn't one of the main ones, this Vincent Adultman.
That's right, I forgot about Vincent Adultman.
This hilarious?
That is...
So Princess Carolyn meets this quote-unquote guy at a bar who's clearly just 3 kids on top of each other in a trench coat.
Yes.
And the way that they use this character for like that, from when they meet him to throughout the rest of the season, is just so funny.
That is one of the best. That's probably the best gag of this. No, that's definitely the best gag of the season.
Yeah.
I went to the stock market today. I did a business.
And then Princess Carolyn is like, it's always business with you.
Yeah, that's right. That is a genius gag. That's a brilliant gag.
Okay, so would I recommend this? Absolutely. I think that you have to be in the right mindset for this show. I would not walk into this show expecting it to be like a hilarious goof 'em up, like your Family Guys or your Simpsons.
Well, I wouldn't exactly consider Family Guy a goof 'em up, but yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's a really, I mean, Netflix pretty much consistently knocks it out of the parks with a lot of their originals. This, I want to say, honestly, was kind of in that first go around, when they were kind of getting their footing with their originals. And yeah, really great. So would definitely recommend.
Yeah, and obviously I'd recommend it because it's one of my favorites. And I'd just say definitely finish it. Obviously you don't need to do it quickly or anything. We're not going to talk about it again. I'm not going to do a Get Recc'd for more of these seasons because I figured you'd probably be finishing it up and watching it on your own terms. But yeah, I would say that, like, for me, the best season is season 3. And like I said, I do think season 1's the weakest season, but because the show is serialized, you have no choice but to watch it in order anyway. And it absolutely pays off. And I think the groundwork they lay in this season is great. And the second half is absolutely brilliant and wonderful. So yeah, I love it. So I think we're pretty much done talking about that. So do you think we're ready to wait, Case? Let's see. Okay, there's a bunch of people talking actually. Let's let me read through some of this, if you don't mind. We've got Meme Thief said a while back, BoJack Horseman will never be better than the mind-altering thriller known as Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. I definitely agree. Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is my jam. I love Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. We've got He's also said most adult cartoons are just in a weird limbo where consequences mean nothing, but it's not absurd enough to be funny. Which, yeah, that's what I think BoJack Horseman manages to kind of outshine. You know, it very much, probably one of the best adult cartoons ever. No, definitely. We've got Paris Minto. BoJack is a character that is great in the context of the show, but I would hate in real life. And Meme Thief says, if I met BoJack in real life, I'd probably hate him with all my being. He has almost no redeeming qualities. Which, yeah, that's kind of what we were getting at. Is like, he really is like, it's amazing they made you care about him. We've got Paris Minto says, fuck BoJack Horseman. The Nut Shack is the best show. You're absolutely
Yeah, I can't disagree there.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, that's right. That gives me an idea. Casey says, Family Guy is more of a goof in human creation than a goof 'em up. That's, yes. No, I mean, I don't know. I personally love Seth MacFarlane's expressive character poses, if you ask me. That's what I really enjoy about Family Guy. Because I know, Steven actually, a lot of you don't know this, but Steven's a big Family Guy fan. He actually goes to the Family Guy cons.
Yeah, I'm all about that guy of the family. Those callbacks, you know what I'm saying?
All right, so...
funny.
Yeah, I love those cutaway gags. Yeah, okay, so we will go to your recommendation, Steven. I want to, if you give me one moment, so I don't do this while you're telling me what you want me to watch.
Okay, I'll talk about my love for Family Guy while you're doing this.
Okay, please do.
So I love in Family Guy how there's a family, and the guy, his name is Peter, and he's fat. Isn't that funny, guys? There's other characters, like he has a daughter. I remember before they brought the show back, she was like a non-character, and then when they brought the show back, they were like, we're just gonna make everyone hate her, and that's funny.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Also, I looked Mr. Peanut Butter, Paul F. Tompkins. That's who I was trying to remember.
Right, yeah,
Paul
yeah.
F. Tompkins does a great job as Mr. Peanut Butter. Mr. Peanut Butter is hilariously naive and happy, and Paul F. Tompkins plays it super well.
It's kind of amazing because, like, I was worried when I went into the show seeing that they're all celebrity, like, real-life actors. That doesn't tend to pan over well, but I feel like they do a brilliant job, and they sound so real. Which is really nuts. Because, I mean, I still maintain that my general rule is that actors are not voice actors, so let's keep them separate, please. But a show like this does kind of prove me wrong, I guess, because, wow.
Yeah, the quality to me in voice acting is, could I disassociate the character from the voice?
Yeah.
And with every character on this show, I don't imagine anyone else being able to play the characters.
Yeah.
Okay, talked about it enough. Let's move on.
Okay, yes, we did, and I have decided on what I'm going to recommend to you. So, we'll go to your rec. All right. Before we do that, though, I'd like to say Meme Thief says, only normies like the Nut Shack. Real television fans watch The List with Mr. List. R.I.P. The Needle Drop Shitpost channel. I rec the show World Peace and Adult Swim. Yeah, okay. I rec the show Steven Universe, the first 4 seasons. Casey, get out. All right. All right, here we go. Bam. Steven, give your pictures up. What do you recommend to me? And give us all a description of what it is. And please be totally objective this time.
Yeah, so I mentioned last time that with our recommendations that we would be objective, and then I specifically said how I liked the thing, so I lied. But this time, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
So my rec is, are you ready? Just in time for the disaster artist, my rec to you is Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
Let's go.
So for those who aren't aware, Tommy Wiseau's The Room, a 2003 independent movie by Tommy Wiseau, directed, produced, and written, and starring Tommy Wiseau. The movie has spawned a book called The Disaster Artist, and now has spawned a film directed by James Franco, which released yesterday, but I'm not sure if it released nationwide yesterday. But it's also called The Disaster Artist.
Yeah, I'm going to see it. It'll be a good time. I'm actually the people I'm going with, we're all going to wear suits, like we're going out to play like we're going out to play some football.
Yeah. Make sure you bring a football.
Of course.
The other thing that I'll mention, because as I was looking through the background, I had no idea that this is a thing, but there's The Room video game. So
really?
By Tom Fulp. He has The Room video game.
Oh, that's awesome. Tom Fulp. Yeah, I could definitely see it.
So that was pretty hilarious to me.
All right.
Okay,
So
so
is that
that's
your rec?
correct to you.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna rec something to you. Take notes. Oh wait, we got Meme Thief says, "The Room is honestly my favorite movie. It's so bad that it's the greatest thing ever. I could watch it for the rest of my life and I would laugh every time." Paris Minto says, "The Room is the film version of Trout Mask Replica."
Wow.
Nope. I know that Paris is a huge fan of Trout Mask, so I think he just means in the sort of absurdist comedy of it all. But all right, here I come. Here is my rec. And honestly, what you just recommended to me was the deciding factor in what I was going to recommend to you of the two things. It made me change my mind. So, Steven, I recommend to you, it's an album. The album is called Filth, and it is by Swans. Let's put that down, Swans Filth. So this album was released in 1983. It was part of the famed no wave movement in New York. However, I think the best way to describe the album, genre-wise, would be industrial or noise rock, or just experimental rock, I guess. The album it's under 40 minutes, so it's not Trout Mask. And this was the first album by Swans, and it was also the beginning of their sort of no wave period, which lasted for about 4 albums. And I don't know that there's much else I can really say about it. That wouldn't give anything away. So that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. So I want to discourage you from reading the chat right now because all these people have, I think, the general consensus opinions on The Room, and I don't want to influence your
Yeah,
your
well,
view.
I didn't actually know about what people think of The Room, actually, so I'm very, very upset about this. The Room is the film version of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Right, that's the one. I don't want you to see that, and now you're going to go in.
No Wave is bad. You know what's great? New metal. If I'm 5'5", then I'm 6'6". Yeah, you got me, Meme Thief. Yeah, actually, Steven, I recommend Slipknot to you. Sorry, I take that back. Yeah, so that's about it. You should have recommended Soundtracks to the Blind. It would have rocked Steven's world. Paris, maybe someday. All right.
As always, next by Fortnite.
That's true. Yes, there always is. Although another Swans album would be kind of overkill. All right, so I think we're about done. Steven, do you wanna take us out here?
Those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.